Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Tom Ricks, and I'm talking today about realignment. So, I think, first of all, it's important to remind folks that this podcast is largely about my writing and my soapbox, and it's been doing really well in the last year as a platform for my soapbox. I finished The Sins of Silicon Valley. I did a few political things, a little bit more about the coup. I didn't do quite as much about the coup as I planned on. And at the end of the day, I think it was because I just felt that I wasn't adding a lot of value except for the one anecdote that I had. Um, the rest you can really look up, right? I mean, you want to know what um, it will be like from a media purpose. Look up anything ever put out by Tokyo Rose or Baghdad Bob. If you want to look up the other podcast, I was thinking in terms of who's lucky versus not. um you want to have food, you want to have water, you want to be prepared, but I'm doing an entire podcast based on that. And the situation about whether or not you should be armed is just so complicated that I just felt I didn't want to touch that at this time. Bottom line, if you end up in a situation where you want to have a gun, it's going to be too late to get one. On the other hand, I totally understand why people are reluctant to have an instrument of death, especially with small, stupid children around, that seem to be self-destructive and want to, hurt themselves or hurt others around them because the adults don't secure things like that properly. A woman just got killed in a Zoom meeting because of that, right? So children are destructive. Children get into things. I know because as a child, got into everything, and and even a combination lock probably wouldn't have been enough to keep me out of things by the time I was 6 or 7 or 8 years old. Because kids find things like that out, and it's very difficult. Unless you're going to have like a DNA or retinal scan on your gun safe. Kids are going to get a hold of it, and you can only teach them so much up until a certain age. If you have a gun in the house, and you have kids in the house, you definitely need to teach kids about that. But like I said, I could do an entire podcast episode, heck, an entire podcast series on guns. And at the end of the day, I just decided that wasn't something I wanted to do. But what I do know is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And while it's true that I've lost a lot of volume in the podcast since I lost Facebook advertising, and while I have deleted my Facebook account, I am still looking at ways I might be able to advertise on Facebook. I have a friend that might be able to help me with that. I don't feel that my political podcasts have had the impact I want. Specifically, the Sins of Silicon Valley, I think I had some really good points, right? I have visual proof that Twitter is up to no good when it comes to unblocking people. I have actual video proof, and I've gotten some interest in it, but not as much as I would have expected. And I think some of it is because there's too many people talking about the obvious and not enough people doing things about it. And I think for me personally, I'll vote, I'll write, but I'm just not a go out into the streets and demonstrate kind of guy. And that is what we need right now. We need more of that, and I am not equipped to do that. So if I'm going to help in a meaningful way besides just voting, um, I need to find a different way of looking at this, and I think I may have found one. My humor and my satire tends to be more effective than most. So what I'm probably going to do in terms of politics and the constitutional reform that I think is desperately needed, that does seem to interest people quite a lot. In other words, when I talk about writing a new constitution or constitutional reform, those tend to get more clicks, more views than some of my generic, this is what's wrong with the world podcasts. And I think that the way I'm going to handle that is probably I'm thinking of writing a series of satire slash pseudo history of how the Constitution was put together in Terra, potentially with multiple constitutions. Thomas Jefferson originally had the idea that we should have a new constitution every 20 to 30 years. Well, I think on Terra, I'm going to make that happen. And Conversely, that's going to allow me to discuss a lot of different ideas about what we can do with our Constitution and how we can get a new Constitution ratified without having an Article 5 convention. Um, but we need something different, that's for sure. And I think that adding a bit of humor and adding a bit of alternate world history might cut the jib. I don't know. We'll see. In general, for a while, not forever, but for a while, I intend to focus more on my writing in this podcast. Definitely until the end of the year and possibly all of next year. My friend Bernard Sotaro Clark has finally been able to solve some sound problems and will be working with me on creating the audiobooks for Grenade Man versus the Zombies. And even though Matt Smith did a fantastic job, that was always meant for the podcast. It was never meant for Audible. So I had Bernie redo that one, and but I'm probably not going to be putting that on the podcast except for maybe the last chapter because for some reason, um, something happened to the last chapter when I put it on YouTube. And so Grenade Man vs. Zombies, which is a free novel on my YouTube channel, um, and which is bar none by a factor of 10, the most popular podcast episode on my YouTube channel, doesn't have the last chapter. So I may simply take the last chapter that Bernie reads and put that available and put the link up there for anybody that wants to see that. And then if you like the novel, which has been out for a while, you can go ahead and pay for it. Have Name Will Travel, I probably will put it on the podcast directly, probably every other week, so I can do short stories and poetry and a few other things that I intend to do. I'll still keep doing Momaries. Um, I have decided to take a break from some of the weirder stuff for a while. How long a while is, I don't know, but basically I'm going to kind of wrap up News of the Four Worlds, Lord Potato. You can call it an ending or you can call it a cliffhanger. I think it'll be amusing either way. But I'm going to try and do a podcast episode a week. Some of it's going to be some of the typical nonsense I've done for a while, but again, I'll take a large break from that. I also have been looking through my stories, and I found quite a few stories that I haven't done podcast episodes of. Some of them are good, some of them are okay. Arguably, a couple of them are bad. I'm also considering having my mother read my first two novels. Um, there's a reason you can't buy my first two novels. I sold them for a while, and to be honest, they just suck. They really do. But I think that the moniker "Those Who Can't Teach," um, I think that I am going to have her read them and then make comments at the end about what worked and what didn't work. I think that now that I've written 7 novels, I think I can teach some things about how to write one, and more importantly, how not to write one, especially from the first two. I learned a lot of lessons from them, and if anything else, it will get them out there, and it'll ensure that they're not as good as the current one I'm writing, which is Army of Fire. I'm about 63,000 words in that one. I stalled for about a year and only got about 4,000, 5,000 words done in a year, but I've gotten more done since then. And I went to something called the Broad Relief Writers Conference, which was virtual, in part hosted by a friend of mine, Bill Bridges. And I got inspired to write again, and I've been since then. I've written about since that conference in the middle of October. I've gotten about 3 or 4 thousand words written. I'm also working on some new short stories. There's a short story series called Project NIMBY about distant future sci-fi. It's just kind of out there. My original goal was to write it in different frames of mind or different states of consciousness. It's proving to get that done is I'm going to have to just flat out write it. Um, we'll see if that works. The first story is great. There's a total of 9 of them. I'm not impressed. I also want to read more of my poetry. I have a poetry blog on Poetify. And I'm also thinking about getting a flat out actual author's website, which kind of ties all this together. Some of the mentor advice I got basically came down to TikTok and Goodreads if you're trying to sell yourself. I already have a TikTok account, but I'm going to start trying to use it more. And I'm going to, I just activated a Goodreads. I have a suspicion that to do the author functions and the free giveaways will take some time, but I'm working on it. So we'll see what happens. This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright 2021.
To fight the forces of evil!